This is continuous coverage.
Continuous coverage.
In the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
Hidden Killers podcast.
We're up to the third segment of our continuous coverage in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. Let's head to the courtroom.
Judge, at this time, the state will call Ryleen Nolan.
All right, now that the witness is sworn, let me just inquire before we start with the examination. Have you previously viewed any of the trial testimony in this case, listened to it, or read about it?
I have not.
Okay, thank you for that. Please respond to any questions verbally so we can keep a clear record. Please try to avoid speaking at the same time as anyone that's questioning you, and talk directly into that microphone so we get a good record. And with that in mind, Mr. Wood, if you'd like to inquire on direct, you may.
Thank you. Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Ryleen, R-Y-L-E-N-E, Nowlin, N-O-W-L-I-N.
Thank you. Where are you employed?
I am employed by the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Laboratory in Meridian, Idaho.
In what capacity are you employed?
I am the Forensic Laboratory Manager.
Could you please tell the jury your educational background and related work experience that brought you to the position you have now?
I have a Bachelor of Science from the College of Idaho. I've completed hundreds of hours of training in biology screening as well as DNA analysis. I began my career in forensics with the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Laboratory in 2002. I was a bench analyst or an everyday scientist in the biology DNA unit until my promotion to laboratory manager in 2014. My duties included analyzing items of evidence for the presence of body fluids, as well as processing items of evidence for a DNA profile. I was also qualified in the DNA database unit, which is analyzing samples from convicted offenders for upload to the National DNA database. Since promoting to lab manager, I have retained my qualifications in the DNA unit. My duties as lab manager include overseeing the day-to-day operations of the laboratory. I supervise the heads of each department in the laboratory, and I oversee our evidence unit.
Thank you. Do you belong to any professional organizations?
Yes.
Which ones?
I am a member of the Northwest Association of Forensic Scientists, the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the Association of Crime Laboratory Directors, the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors. I'm also a molecular biology fellow with the American Board of Criminalistics.
And have you testified as an expert regarding DNA analysis previously?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 85 times prior to today.
Okay. And have you done, how many times have you tested DNA?
I would say over the course of 20 years, I've tested thousands of samples.
Okay. Let's talk about DNA for a minute. At a 101 level, what is DNA?
DNA is a substance that's found in the cells of our body, and it acts as a blueprint. It tells our bodies not only what form to take, but how to function.
Okay, and so do we all have different DNA?
Between individuals, with the exception of identical twins, our DNA is over 99% the same. And in forensics, we're targeting that less than 1% that's unique to an individual, again, with the exception of identical twins.
Okay, so for any two people in this room, their DNA is about 99% the same.
That's correct. That's why we all have the same basic form and our bodies function in the same way.
Okay. Which body fluids contain DNA?
DNA is found in the cells in our body. So, for instance, in our saliva, it's our cheek cells that are sloughed off into that saliva. In our sweat, it's our skin cells that are sloughed off into that. DNA is also found in our bones and teeth as well.
Okay. And how can DNA testing be used in forensics?
In forensics, again, we're looking at those portions of DNA that are unique to an individual. They don't tell me anything about an individual. I can't tell you what color eyes they have, what color hair, how tall they are, but I can use that profile that's generated from an item of evidence and compare it to known individuals in a case to determine the source.
Okay. And what do you mean by profile?
A DNA profile is developed in our laboratory. We look at multiple different locations on the DNA. And half of our DNA comes from our mom and half from our father. And in looking at those, you receive one variable from each parent. So if I can compare it to blood typing, it's a letter. So we're looking at, did you receive an A from one parent and a B from another parent, so you're an AB? This is the same, except we're looking at many more locations, and instead of a letter, it's a number.
Okay. And what is the process to determine who a forensic sample originated from?
It's a multi-step process. The first step, as I mentioned, DNA is found in our cells. So the first step is to break open those cells and pull the DNA out, and then remove all of the other cellular components from that sample. The next step is a process for determining how much DNA is present in that sample. Once that's determined, because in forensics we are typically looking at very low amounts of DNA, the next step is called molecular xeroxing. And it's similar to you have a whole dictionary, but you only want to look at 24 pages in that dictionary. So you're just going to copy those particular pages. Those are those specific locations on the DNA of interest in forensics. And it copies them 1,000,000-fold so that there is enough present to visualize. It's then put on an instrument called a genetic analyzer, and that is what interprets the DNA and gives those number assignments at each of the locations.
And those number assignments at each of those locations, is that called a DNA profile?
We refer to that as a DNA profile, yes.
Okay. So once you generate a DNA profile, what can you do with that? Can you compare it to other DNA profiles?
Yes, it can be compared to other profiles if there was DNA on multiple items of evidence in a case. And it can also be compared to known samples from individuals involved in a case.
Okay. Is this method widely accepted by the scientific community?
Yes, it is.
And what steps do you take to ensure the process works correctly?
There are multiple steps that are taken to ensure the process works correctly. There are controls built into the system. So there are samples known as negative controls. Essentially, they go through the same process as all of the other samples, but no DNA is added to those. So at the end, they should be free from DNA. If there's any DNA present in those, then we have to go back and look to see if something happened. There also is a sample of a known DNA profile. So at the end, I can look at that and make sure the correct profile was obtained so that I know the process worked correctly. In addition, we have multiple safeguards built in. So when I go into the laboratory, everything is bleached down, clean paper is put down. I prepare myself by wearing a lab coat, a mask, gloves. My hair is pulled back. Only one item of evidence is ever open at a time, and evidence samples are processed separately in time and space from samples from known individuals.
Okay. Is the Idaho State Police Lab an accredited DNA forensics lab?
Yes, we are.
What accreditation standards do you meet?
We are accredited through the American Association for Laboratory Accreditation, commonly known as A2LA. We are accredited under the ISO 17025, and that's the International Organization for Standards. 17025 are standards specific to laboratories, just in general laboratories. They have a separate set of standards known as R221, and those are the standards specific to forensic laboratories. So we have to be accredited to all of those standards. In addition, because Idaho State Police Forensic Services uploads samples to the National DNA Database, the FBI has established a separate set of standards known as the Quality Assurance Standards for forensic casework laboratories that we also must adhere to and be audited under.
And I should have asked you this earlier. Oh, no, I did ask you that earlier. Never mind. Were you assigned to work at case M2020-2233?
Yes, I was assigned to work some items of evidence in that case.
Does this case correspond to the state of Idaho versus Lori Daybell or Lori Vallow?
Yes, it does.
Okay. For your involvement, what items were sent forward for DNA testing in this case?
The items that I was specifically asked to examine were, do you want the laboratory case item number or just a description?
Just a description at this time.
So the first item were biological samples said to be collected from Tylee Ryan, and that consisted of molars and a section of rib. I was also given biological samples said to have been collected from a Joshua J. Vallow, also consisted of molars and a section of rib. I was also given known samples from individuals in the case, specifically Mr. Dennis Trahan, Trahan, as well as Ms. Vallow.
Okay. Let's talk about Tylee Ryan. Did you do any DNA testing regarding Tylee Ryan?
Yes, I did.
What did you do?
I performed DNA analysis of one of the molars that was submitted, and that process involves thoroughly cleaning the exterior of the tooth to remove any surface contaminants or bacteria that could be present, and then taking that tooth and creating it a pulverized powder, and then that powder is what went forward through that multi-step DNA process that I explained earlier to generate a DNA profile from that item.
Okay. And were you able to generate a profile from that item?
Yes, I was.
And did you do any comparisons between that DNA profile and any other known DNA profiles?
I did.
Who did you compare it against?
I compared it to a DNA profile generated from the sample from Lori Vallow.
Did you write a report detailing the results of that testing?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What were those results?
The comparison I performed was, sorry, that's echoing a little bit, was to determine if Lori Vallow could be a possible parent to the deceased individual said to be Tylee Ryan. So I calculated a statistic. It's known as the single parentage index. And what I determined was that Lori Vallow could not be excluded from being the biological mother of the deceased individual said to be Tylee Ryan. The single parentage index, which is a statistical calculation for the locations of DNA that I examined, was 2,528,000,000, and that 99.9999% of the female population would be expected to be excluded from being a biological mother of the deceased individual said to be Tylee Ryan.
Okay. Is there a way to get to 100% of excluding every other woman as being the mother of Tylee Ryan?
In paternity statistics and paternity calculations, I'm basing it on a population database. And that number I gave, that 2 billion number, that's a likelihood ratio. So it's comparing the two hypotheses. So the first hypothesis is Lori Vallow is the biological mother of the deceased individual. And the second hypothesis is she's not. So that's calculating how likely are those two hypotheses. And the only way to get to 100%, because you're only looking at one half of an individual's DNA, would be to test every woman in the world and compare to that sample.
Okay. But can you just state again for the record what number of women, the percentage, are excluded from being the mother of Tylee Ryan?
Based on the locations of DNA that were analyzed, it's expected that 99.9999% of women would be excluded from being the biological mother of the deceased individual said to be Tylee Ryan.
And what was the statistical likelihood that Lori Vallow is the mother of in this DNA testing of Tylee Ryan?
So to state that differently, it is 2,528,000,000 times more likely that Lori Vallow is the mother of the deceased individual as opposed to another randomly selected woman from the population being the mother.
Okay. And I realize the way I was asking that question is probably not totally appropriate because we're talking about samples, correct? And so that was based on the known sample of Lori Vallow and then the sample from the molar of what was assumed to be Tylee Ryan, correct?
Correct. I did a comparison of those two items.
Did you do any DNA testing related to JJ Vallow?
I did. I had the tooth sample said to be from Joshua J. Vallow.
Was there anything remarkable about that tooth sample?
The tooth sample was different than any I have seen previously in that when I broke open the tooth, there were still, I guess the best word to say is plump blood vessels still present inside the tooth.
Okay. And what steps did you take in that DNA testing?
I performed the same process as described earlier. The only difference is I had to use forceps, fancy name for tweezers, to peel those blood vessels out because bones are treated differently than other types of tissue, so I needed to separate those and process them differently.
Okay. And how did you process both those items?
I did.
And were you able to generate a DNA profile for those items?
I was.
And between the molar and those vessels, were those profiles identical?
They were.
Okay. Did you compare that sample against any other known samples?
I did. That sample was compared against a sample from a Mr. Dennis Trahan.
Okay. And what were the results of that comparison?
Again, I was looking to see if Mr. Trahan could be a biological parent of the deceased individual. I performed the same statistical calculations, and so I couldn't exclude him from being a biological parent. And for the locations of DNA examined, the single parentage index was 602,000. And the probability of exclusion, other men would be excluded from being the biological father, was 99.9999%.
Okay. And did you put that information in a lab report?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Your Honor, the state has no further questions at this time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any cross-examination?
No, Your Honor.
All right. That will conclude the testimony of this witness then. Is the witness allowed to be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
No objection.
All right. The witness may be released. Also, thank you for your testimony today. The bailiff will help you be escorted off the bench to out of the court.
Thank you.
In terms of scheduling, I'll inquire of the state. Do you want to get another witness started at this time or perhaps look at the lunch break?
I think it would be a good time to start the lunch break, Your Honor.
Okay. We will go ahead and take our lunch recess then. We will plan on starting back up by no later than 12:45.
All right, please.
Thank you. Please be seated. Let's have the jurors brought in, please.
All right, please. Jury's all present, count for Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Bailiff. Please be seated. Okay, we're back on the record on case CR 22-21-1624, State of Idaho versus Lori Noreen Vallow. The state's continuing with its case in chief. The jurors are all present and accounted for, properly seated. The defense is here as well as the defendant and the prosecution. Counsel, just before we get started here, I wanted to discuss briefly the scheduling we have. We'll need to be done today by 3:20 instead of 3:30, just so counsel's aware. And then in terms of tomorrow, we've determined we're going to have a shortened schedule tomorrow. We're going to go from 8:30 until 1:30 tomorrow, and we're not going to do a full lunch break, but we will provide something during one of the breaks for the jurors to have something so they don't have to go clear till 1:30 without lunch. So that's going to be the schedule for this afternoon and tomorrow. Mr. Wood, then, I believe when we left off, we needed to have another witness called at this time. Is that correct?
Yes, the state would call Katie Dace.
Okay.
Testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God.
All right, before you get started with your direct, Mr. Wood, let me just inquire of the witness briefly. Have you at any time viewed any of the trial testimony in this case, either through online exposure to that, looking it up, or reading it anywhere?
No.
Okay, thank you for your response there. While you're testifying, please make sure to talk directly into the microphone. Please make verbal responses to any questions so we can keep the record clear, and avoid talking at the same time as anyone asking you a question. So with that in mind, Mr. Wood, you can inquire on your direct.
Thank you. Ms. Dace, could you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
My name is Catherine Dace, D-A-C-E.
What is your occupation or profession?
I am a forensic biologist and supervisor with the Idaho State Police Forensic Services in Meridian, Idaho.
Okay. And how long have you been employed by the Idaho State Police Forensics Lab?
Since 2016.
Okay. Is that the first forensics lab you've worked at?
No.
What other labs have you worked at?
I began my career in 2008 with the Denver Police Department in Denver, Colorado. I worked there for approximately 4 years. After that, I went to work for a military contractor performing DNA services overseas for approximately 1 year. After that, in 2014, I went to work for the Texas Department of Public Safety in Austin, Texas. And then in 2016, I came to Idaho.
Would you describe your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in forensic biology from West Virginia University.
Okay. And did your formal education include the study of DNA?
It did.
Did that education include hands-on work with DNA testing techniques?
It did.
Are you certified by any boards?
Yes, I am certified by the American Board of Criminalistics in molecular biology.
Okay. And what are your duties and responsibilities at the Idaho State Police Forensics Lab?
As a forensic scientist, my job is to examine items of evidence for the presence of biological fluids and materials, attempt to generate DNA profiles from those items, and then make comparisons to known samples. As a supervisor, my job is to supervise other employees and manage budgets and things like that.
Okay. Did you receive evidence in the case of the state of Idaho versus Lori Vallow?
I did.
And is that identified in your lab by the number M2020-2233?
It is.
What evidence did you receive in this case?
I received autopsy samples from JJ Vallow to include hand swabs, nail swabs, oral swabs, rectal swabs, and penile swabs. I also received tape and plastic from the body and burial site. I received some swabs from an apartment, 565 Pioneer 175. I received a chain and pendant, and I also received 18 hand tools from a garage/barn at the Daybell property. Lastly, I received a few reference samples as well.
Okay. Did you mention receiving bags?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about those real quick. Did you ever find, were you ever able to locate or generate a DNA profile from any material on any of the bags you were provided?
The bags from the burial site?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Did you ever do any testing on any duct tape?
I did.
Can you tell us what type of testing you did?
Yes, I received duct tape from the hands, ankles, and mouth, and then duct tape with a plastic bag from around the head, and tape and plastic that the body was wrapped in. I examined these items with the latent print examiner at the same time, and most of the tape and plastic had apparent blood and decomposition fluid present, so I tested all those items for blood, which was positive. As far as DNA testing goes on the tape, I was looking at the tape ends for any irregular edges that could maybe indicate that someone had torn the tape with their teeth and left behind saliva. So I did swab a couple areas of that. And then lastly, I assisted Tara, the latent print examiner, with collecting hairs and fibers from the tape.
Okay. Excuse me. You said that some of that fluid tested positive for blood.
It did.
And where was that located specifically?
Really all over the surface of everything, all over the surface of the tape and the plastic.
Did you do any DNA testing on that?
No.
Okay. How come?
It was pretty clear it was decomposition fluid from the victim, and at this point we were trying to identify DNA that might be from the perpetrator, so it was not of evidentiary value.
Okay. You mentioned a chain and pendant that you received. Did you test those for the presence of blood?
I did.
Okay. And were you able to find any blood on those?
No, they were negative.
Okay. And you mentioned some swabs from apartment 175.
Yes.
Tell us what you did with those items.
There was a swab from a knife, and I tested that for blood, and it was negative. There was also a swab from a wall, and I tested that, and it was extremely weak positive, presumptively, for blood. And that was all the testing I did on those items.
Okay. Ms. Dace, I want to talk to you about some of the tools you received. Do you recall what tools you received?
Yes, there were 18 hand tools. It was a variety of shovels, a pickaxe, a pair of shears, a post hole digger, and several hand saws.
Okay. And did you do any type of testing on these tools?
I did.
Overall, what type of testing did you do with those tools?
I was looking for blood and potential human remains, so I did do blood testing on the tools, and then I also examined the surfaces for anything I thought that could be biological.
Okay. Did you find anything that you considered to be of evidentiary value?
Yes, I found several presumptive positive blood stains on the tools, and on several of the tools I thought I found what could be charred flesh.
Okay. And what did you do with those tools specifically?
So I photographed them and collected what I found, and then I selected 4 samples of the potential flesh to run for DNA testing. Prior to that, I took photographs of that material with a stereo microscope to get a better visual sample or visual representation, and then I took portions of each of those for DNA analysis.
Can you tell the jury what a stereo microscope is?
It's a version of a microscope that is for items you can already see with the naked eye, unlike other microscopes where you're maybe looking at things that are otherwise invisible. So in this case, what I was looking at, I could already see, but you could not see, very clearly.
Okay. Your Honor, I'm going to ask that the witness be handed State's Exhibit 201A through 201Q. Ms. Stace, do you recognize, or will you take a moment and look through State's Exhibit 201A through 201Q, and when you're done, let me know when you're done reviewing it.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Do you recognize State's Exhibits 201A through 201Q?
I do.
What do they purport to be?
They are photos I've taken during my examinations.
And are these photos that you took yourself?
Yes.
And are they true? Well, what are they photos of?
There are photos of the tools that I examined, some of the material I collected from the tools, and some of the material under the stereoscope. And then the last photo is of some hairs from the tape.
Okay. Are these true and accurate representations of the photographs you took?
They are.
Your Honor, I'd ask that State's Exhibit 201A through 201Q be entered into evidence.
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. May I voir dire and aid?
Yes.
So on each one of these photographs, Ms. Dace, there are writings and some annotations. Did you superimpose those onto these photographs?
Yes.
Okay. So when he says, are these true and accurate photographs of what were taken, they are true and accurate to the extent that they hadn't been altered by this photoshopping or this superimposing other things on top?
No. All of these labels were made using Microsoft Paint.
Okay. But you superimposed them onto the photographs?
Yes.
Okay. With that explanation, Your Honor, I have no objection.
All right, thank you. Mr. Thomas, the exhibits 201A through Q are all admitted.
Sorry.
Ms. Dace, if I speak about item 36.4, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, it is one of the shovels.
Is that a number that was your lab assigned to that tool?
Yes, there were several tools in one bag, and that was item 36, and so each tool received a sub-item 1 through 5.
Okay. So tell me about item 36.4.
It was a shovel that I examined, and on the blade of the shovel, I identified material I thought I might want to run for DNA.
Okay. Your Honor, may I publish to the jury?
Yes.
Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, that is my photo.
What is that a photograph of?
A shovel.
Is that item 36.4?
Yes.
Okay. What are some of the these things that have been superimposed? What does that mean?
I am outlining areas that I sampled, that I swabbed. So in addition to looking for blood or biological remains, I was also swabbing the tools for preservation.
Okay. And can you describe what we're seeing in State's Exhibit 201B?
That is a close-up photo of the blade of the shovel, and that is circling in the light blue what I collected.
Okay. And State's, what do you observe in State's Exhibit 201C?
In the previous photo, you could see the area that I circled. This is what I collected off of it, and this is under the stereoscope stereo microscope. And then the blue box is outlining the portion that I took for DNA analysis.
Okay. And were you able to generate a DNA profile from that material?
I was not.
Okay. Can you tell me about State's Exhibit, Lab Item 36.5?
It is another shovel.
Okay. Can you tell me what you observe in State's Exhibit 201D?
It is a shovel that is item 36.5.
Okay. And did you do any type of testing on this?
Yes, I also collected some material that I photographed under the stereoscope and ran for DNA.
Okay. What was it about that material that that caught your attention?
When I'm looking at these shovels and you're looking at dirt and some of the shovels had what appeared like ashes on them, these fragments had a different appearance. They did not look like something that's normally in dirt. They looked like they could possibly be flesh. But it's difficult to know when you had a body subjected to fire. So I simply photographed them and then attempted DNA to see if it would work.
Okay. And what do you observe in State's Exhibit 201E?
The line on the right side of the photo is pointing at what I saw when I had brushed away some dirt. And that material that's kind of a pinkish tan color is what I collected.
Okay. And what do you observe in State's Exhibit 201F?
This is the piece of that material that I ran for DNA, and this is the photo of it underneath the stereo microscope.
Okay. Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from that sample?
I was not.
There's a blue box. What does that represent?
That is the portion that I took for DNA. The remainder was not consumed for DNA.
Yeah. Can you tell me about lab item number 36.1?
Yes, it is a pickaxe from that bag of tools.
Okay, let me circle back. I'm going to actually ask you about item 36.3 first.
It is a shovel from that same bag of tools.
Okay. Can you tell me what you observe in State's Exhibit 201G?
This is a photograph that I took of the tool, and it is labeled 36.5.
Okay,
36.3.
Okay, thank you. What, if anything, did you do with this tool?
Again, I looked for blood and collected debris and other material from the blade of the shovel.
Okay. And what do you observe in State's Exhibit 201H?
This is a photo of the back side of the blade of the shovel, and that circled area represents some material I collected for DNA testing.
Okay. Why did you collect that?
It had a somewhat soft texture and again seemed like it could possibly be biological remains.
Okay. And what do you observe in State's Exhibit 36, State's Exhibit 201I?
That is a photograph of that material on the back of the shovel, now removed from the shovel and taken by itself.
And what do you observe in State's Exhibit 201J?
This is a photograph of that material underneath the stereo microscope, and the area outlined with the blue box indicates the portion that I took for DNA testing.
Okay. And there's something labeled green material. Do you know what that is?
I do not.
Okay, so you didn't test that material.
No.
Does the Idaho State Forensic Lab, do you test any materials?
Like trace analysis?
Yes.
We do not have a trace section at our laboratory.
Okay. In regards to item 36.3, were you able to obtain a DNA profile?
I was.
How did you do that?
DNA testing begins with identifying a sample that you want to run for DNA. I then take a portion of that sample and put it into a tube with unique case identifiers on it. I then break open all the cells to release the DNA, and then I determine how much DNA is present in the sample, called quantification. From there, we copy the specific locations of DNA that make our forensic DNA profile, and I then visualize those copies, which look like peaks on a graph. Once I have my DNA profiles for a case, I can begin to make my comparisons.
Okay. Did you receive any known DNA profiles prior to your testing?
Yes.
Who did you receive known DNA profiles for?
For me specifically, I received a sample from Chad Daybell, a sample from Melanie Gibb, and a sample from Richard Mao. The laboratory itself also received other reference samples.
Okay. And did you receive any other known samples from within your lab?
Yes, from JJ Vallow, from Tylee Ryan, from Lori Vallow, and I believe Dennis Trahan.
Okay. So this item,
Dennis Trahan.
I'm going to put this back up. This item in 201J was located on the back of that shovel. After you obtained a DNA profile, did you compare it to any other known profiles?
I did.
Did you find any match? Or what did your comparison show?
The DNA profile obtained from item 36.3.5 matched that obtained from the reference sample of Tylee Ryan. This DNA profile is at least 604 octillion times more likely to be seen if Tylee Ryan is the source than if an unrelated, randomly selected individual from the general population is the source.
Okay. Can you say that number one more time?
604 octillion.
How many zeros is octillion?
27.
Okay. Can you tell me about lab item 36.1?
It is a pickaxe from that bag of tools.
Okay. Can you tell me what you observe in States Exhibit 201K?
This is a photo of the pickaxe that I took and is labeled 36.1.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you do with this tool?
I tested it for blood and also examined debris and foreign material that I collected from the eye of the pickaxe.
And can you tell the jury what you observe in States Exhibit 201L?
This is a photograph of the head of the pickaxe. The circle in the center is referred to as the eye of the pickaxe. And when examining it, there was brown colored dirt present, which you see on the left side of the photo. That was on the outside. And then when that was removed, there was a much darker material present around the eye in that area, which I collected, and that's more in the center of the photograph.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 2010. Oh. Is that the same pickaxe?
Yes, it's a close-up of that material still present on the eye that you can see kind of, where it was located.
I'm going to go back to State's Exhibit 201L. And perhaps you already answered it, but what was the difference between, I'm going to point at this material here and this material there?
The material on the left looked more like dirt. That's not anything that's a scientific conclusion. That's apparent, that appears visible to me. And then the material in the center was very dark, and it was it had an oily texture. When it was removed from the eye of the pickaxe, the metal ring appeared to have kind of a dark, greasy ring around it. And then in the material were some larger fragments.
You tell me what you observe in State's Exhibit 201N, as in November.
These are the larger pieces of fragments that I removed from that dark, kind of black material from the eye of the pickaxe. And then at the bottom, that blue line is pointing to the piece that I selected to photograph and run for DNA.
Can you tell me what you observe in State's Exhibit 201P?
This is a view of that material underneath the stereo microscope, and the blue box represents the area I ran for DNA.
Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from that subject matter?
I was able to obtain a partial DNA profile from this item.
And what do you mean by a partial DNA profile?
For a DNA profile, we look at 24 locations, and there are times when we do not have enough DNA or the DNA is degraded, and we get results for just some of the locations, and that's referred to as a partial DNA profile.
All right. And are you still able to do a comparative analysis with a partial DNA profile?
For this partial profile, yes.
Okay. And is it accepted in the scientific community to do a comparative analysis with a partial profile?
Yes.
Okay. What were the results? Well, what known samples did you compare this against?
I compared it against the known samples previously mentioned from this case.
Okay. So can you just say it again for the record, which names those would be?
So in this case, the DNA profile obtained was a female. So in that case, we would just make comparisons to the female references. So I compared it to Lori Vallow and Tylee Ryan. And I'm not sure if at this time we had the reference sample from Melanie Gibb. I'm not sure.
Okay. From your comparative analysis, did you come to any conclusions?
Yes.
What were those?
Tylee Ryan is a potential contributor to this partial DNA profile. This DNA profile is at least 159 trillion times more likely to be seen if it originated from Tylee Ryan than if it originated from an unrelated, randomly selected individual from the general population.
Okay. Did you do any other testing on item 36.1?
Yes, there were some stains that tested presumptively positive for blood on the handle.
Okay. Can you describe what you observed in State's Exhibit 201M?
These are the two areas that tested positive, or two of the areas that tested positive on the handle.
What did they test positive for?
Blood.
Okay. And were you able to do any further testing on those samples?
Yes, I swabbed those samples and ran the entire swab for DNA.
Okay. Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from those samples?
I was.
Okay. Did you do that in the same manner in which you've described preparing a DNA profile before?
Yes.
Okay. And you were able to obtain a profile?
Yes.
Did you do any comparative analysis with that profile against other known profiles?
I did.
What was were you able to reach a conclusion?
The DNA profile from item 36.1.3 matched that obtained from the reference sample of Tylee Ryan. Again, this DNA profile is at least 604 octillion times more likely to be seen if Tylee Ryan is the source than if an unrelated, randomly selected individual from the general population is the source.
Ms. Stace, you talked earlier about examining duct tape.
Yes.
Is there a hierarchy of testing, and maybe that's not the best way to say it. Is there a priority of different types of forensic testing for an item such as duct tape?
Yes, and it depends on the specific case. However, when you are looking at duct tape that was attached to a person, it's very likely to find their DNA, and it can be very difficult to find DNA from someone else, since the duct tape itself is going to take the DNA from the skin it was touching or the clothing that it was touching. Especially with the presence of blood and decomposition fluid, the chances of getting a foreign DNA profile were quite low, and in this case, I only swabbed a few of the tape ends for saliva and then left the rest of the tape for latent print analysis.
Okay. Ms. Stace, are you aware if any items that you collected were ever sent to any other labs for further testing?
I believe some of the trace we collected from the tape was sent to another laboratory.
Okay. Can you tell me what you observe in States Exhibit 201Q?
These are some of the hairs that were collected from the tape from the plastic and duct tape that the body was wrapped in.
So this is the black bag and duct tape that were on the exterior of JJ, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So it wasn't the duct tape wrapped around his arms?
Correct.
Okay. Is there a pointer up there?
Is this a pointer?
It's hard to see through the projector. On the yellow sticky pad marked as B, is there a hair on there?
Yes. It is on the top half of the piece of paper, and it kind of goes like that.
Okay. And is that a hair that you collected?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to test that hair?
No.
Okay. Are you aware if that hair was sent to any other lab for testing?
Yes, it was sent to Bodie Labs.
Okay. One moment, Your Honor. Your Honor, the state has no further questions at this time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wood. Mr. Thomas, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's okay. Now they're definitely not in order. Ms. Dace, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, looks like you are currently a forensic biologist with the ISP lab, is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And I got some of your work history. It looks like you worked at the Texas Department of something. Which department did you work at?
Texas Department of Public Safety in Austin, Texas.
And what did you do for them?
The same thing. I was an analyst, so I processed items of evidence and generated DNA profiles.
Okay. Similar to the work you do at the ISP lab?
Correct.
And is that the Texas version of the ISP lab?
Yes.
Okay, good. And you do supervisory work at the ISP lab?
Yes, since 2020.
Okay. But you also do analysis, or is that no longer, you don't anymore do analysis, or is that part of your job as well?
I still do it. Yeah, we're a pretty small lab.
Okay, all right. Looks like you received some autopsy samples, some tape and some plastic, and the state kind of walked you through a lot of that. I'm a little bit interested in the hair that you found. Do you recall which sample you found that hair on?
The hair that was in the picture just a minute ago?
Yeah, and on the little yellow sticky note.
Yes, that was, I believe, from 11.8, so the piece of tape 8 from item 11.
Okay. And you don't know where that came from on the plastic or wherever? That just came to you as a piece of tape?
No, it came to us. Some of the tape was still on the plastic. However, the latent print examiner did that deconstruction, so she would probably be able to better answer that question.
So it first went to the latent print examiner, and then it went to you?
Yeah, when we received it, it was in the latent print lab, and we did open it together, but some of the tape had to be unstuck from itself, and that's a slow process. So I was not in there for the whole thing. So I would come back and help when she was ready, and then a lot of times the tape was already taken apart and set up.
Okay. And is that Ms. Martinez?
Yes.
Okay. And so how long did that process take of taking the tape apart? And then when I guess what I'm asking, let me just start over. When was it that you saw the hair on the tape? Was that something that was brought to your attention, or was that something that you brought to Tara's attention or Ms. Martinez's attention?
It was simply part of our examination process. So before the tape needed to go for latent processing, we wanted to remove what we could. So once the tape was unstuck and ready to be examined, I believe we went through it together, but I know that I was looking at each piece of tape and pulling off any hairs or fibers that I thought could be collected.
Mm-hmm. And how did this tape come to you? Was it kind of in a ball, or was it just layered, or how? I mean, when you're saying you had to unstick some of this stuff.
Yeah. It was inside an autopsy bag, so the medical examiner's bag, and I believe most of the tape was still stuck to the bag in a way that indicated it probably had been received that way from the burial site, so it hadn't been all taken off. I think a few pieces may have come loose, but those photographs were all taken by Tara.
Okay. And so inside the autopsy bag, you said there was like some fluid, loose fluid and things floating around in there. Is that right? Or was I mistaken? Yeah? Okay. And so that's where this tape was as well?
Yes, and the black plastic.
And the black plastic. So the autopsy bag wasn't the black plastic bag?
Correct. It's a black autopsy bag containing black plastic and the tape.
I see. Okay. And so floating within this black autopsy bag, and when you say bag, autopsy bag, it's a body bag? Is that what I'm thinking?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So probably 6 feet long, and it's got a zipper on it, and you unzip it, and inside there's all the stuff that was floating around.
Correct.
Okay. So is it possible that this hair could have been part of that stuff that was floating around and got stuck on some of that tape?
Yes.
Okay. All right. You identified a couple of shovels that you thought might have DNA on it, and then you tested it and weren't able to get a profile, right?
Yes, 36.4 and 36.5.
Okay. And then you did DNA on one, and you got a match on a small particle that had Tylee's DNA on it, right?
Correct.
Okay. And when you get these big numbers of the possibility that it could be somebody else, that's based on a formula that you generate?
Yes.
Okay. And so do you know what the current state of the, how do I want to say this? The DNA population that has been collected. Do you know the current state of that? Well, how many DNA samples we have or that you have to use in that?
There is a population database that was generated by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, and that is what we use.
Right. And do you know how many samples are in there? I know my sample's not in there.
No, it's not. It's from known individuals who participated in the study. I believe it's around 1,700.
1,700?
Yes.
Okay. 1,700?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
I don't think it's exactly 1,700, but it's right around there.
Right. And you're basing that on on a number, and there's a separate one if someone was Native American, right? They would have to go into a separate database, or there is a separate, how do I say this, separate formula for people that are Native American, right?
For some of the really small populations, there are separate databases that more accurately represent the DNA frequencies of their population.
Right. And so you don't know if Tylee Ryan is part Native American?
No, we only perform those calculations by request. So we don't know the ethnicity of anyone in our case unless someone were to ask us.
Right.
That. Yeah.
Okay. So your calculations are basically based on this formula, which is kind of taken from these 1,700 people that have put their database in, or their DNA into the database?
It's actually not in any sort of, it's not a database the way you would think of in terms of a law enforcement database. It's a research sample set. And everyone in that database is a self-identified race. So there's Caucasian, Hispanic, and African American, and those are the three main ones. And if there were something different like Native American, that is a separate database set.
Okay. And you ran Tylee's off of the Caucasian database set.
So it actually runs off of all three, and we report the most common statistic or the lowest statistic. And in this case, that would be for Caucasian.
Okay. All right. And when did you run these tests on these DNA samples that you found on the shovel? When was that run?
I would need to refer to my notes to see those dates.
Sure, you want to do that?
Yes, please.
All right, we'll have the record reflect the witness is being shown her notes. You can hand those to her, Mr. Bailiff. Thank you.
So for 36.1.5 and 36.3.5, my report is dated in April of 2021.
Okay. And were you ever in contact with the FBI with regards to things that may need to be sent to other labs, like the FBI lab or those kinds of things?
No.
No? Okay. Did you think about possibly telling someone that you found, or I guess I need to know the thought process. There was some testimony earlier today where somebody testified to the fact that they didn't get any tools to make a tool mark analysis. Would this be something that you would, if you found evidence of DNA on a particular tool, that you would forward on to somebody else?
No, we only report our results back to the submitting agency.
Okay. And then it's on that submitting agency, the police department or the sheriff's department or the prosecutor, whoever submitted that, to follow through and submit that to somebody else.
Yes. In this case, the tools did remain in our laboratory pending permission to consume that the potential blood stain that was on the handle of the pickaxe. And so pending that decision making, the tools did stay in our custody.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Nothing further.
All right.
I didn't need to use these.
And in addition, if you want to collect her notes once you've done that, thank you. Any redirect?
Just very briefly. Ms. Stace, both defense counsel and I spoke to you about a hair that was collected from tape that was sent to another lab.
Yes.
Did that hair receive any identifying number?
It was 11.16.8B.
11.16.8B. Okay. I have no further questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wood.
No follow-up.
All right. That'll conclude the testimony of this witness then. Is the witness here under subpoena? And if so, can she be released?
She can be released, Your Honor.
We have no objection.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. I'll have the bailiff help escort you out of the courtroom.
That wraps up segment number 3 of our continuous coverage. It's trial audio from the 27th of April, 2023, in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. There's more to come. Stay with us.
This is continuous coverage
Continuous coverage. Continuous coverage.
in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell from the Hidden Killers podcast.
Hidden Killers Podcast.